Hello, all kinds of familiar faces.
Like a homecoming.
I know.
Yeah.
All the usual
Party.
suspects.
Can't get rid of us.
I tried, but apparently it didn't work very well. How are folks this morning? It's still morning for everybody here? Yeah,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Good.
excellent.
I got off work at 1:15 last night, so my body's complaining.
Okay, well, we'll be kind
We're
to
okay.
it. Good. So there's no slides for today, so I thought we would just keep these as conversations. I have slides. If you need a slide, we can give you a slide, but I thought we would just try to tailor these for whatever specific questions you have about the ID program. So I'm sort of curious, just to give me some context, like what intrigues you about this this program, or what isn't calling you to be on the call today, just to give me a flavor for where your interests are headed and what you might be curious about, and then I can figure out what would be best helpful to share. Tom.
I'll start. The distinction between the narrative release and the ID program, is there a spectrum of where to start? I started with narrative coaching, but I don't know if that's at entry level or middle or where.
Okay. Well, I can answer that one fairly quickly, I think. Natalie's joining the call, so I'll wait till she comes on so she has the answer as well. There she is.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, Natalie.
Sorry, I had to finish up another meeting.
No worries. So we're just checking in, Natalie, and I was asking kind of what was drawing people to the conversation today about ID. So Tom was asking, like, how are the three programs different? So we sent out a blog post a few days back because we were asked that question a lot. Kind of what we're doing going forward, Tom, is we're really highly encouraging people to start with narrative coaching, primarily because it's the longest running piece of my work. It's the most established. And it's this nice combination of introducing you to the philosophy of this work with a direct application in coaching. So narrative release and ID kind of go in opposite directions from there. It just depends on your sort of primary focus in your own professional life and development. So narrative release just goes full on into the philosophy of the work, the sort of the spiritual philosophy of the work. And so there is no teaching per se. There will be lots of learning, but there'll be almost no teaching. It'll be a series of, with Carolyn and I, of a lot of experiences, a lot of reflections, a lot of sort of in the field assignments, if you will. It's really looking at the role that you see yourself. Oh, there's Julie. The role you see yourself playing, particularly when you're faced with more difficult issues in your clients, and how do you develop yourself to be able to hold bigger spaces for them. And so we'll deal with practical things like grief and shadow and trauma, but it's not another program about how to deal with trauma. It's really about how to develop yourself to be in the presence of challenging issues, and what are some of the deepening of the things you started in narrative coaching that would be possible that way. ID is kind of going in the other direction, which is where it began for me, which is how do you scale what you learned in narrative coaching to work in any context, as a facilitator, as a trainer, as an OD consultant. And it's looking at it focuses a lot on learning and development. And so there's a whole significant block in that program looking at the primary differences between how we think about learning and development in our work and how it's often portrayed, which to me has no bearing on research or reality much. And so Yeah, so that's probably enough for right now. They just sort of, it depends on whether you want to scale it or you want to go deeper into yourself.
Okay. So the idea is more organizational development.
Yeah, it's most often used by people who are working with organizations or in organizations, but we've had quite a few people in higher education and in schools. People that we have a lot of facilitators in this particular cohort, people that are working with groups of people around issues and trying to help them kind of, because it's basically saying, you know, we're often hired to do traditional things. Would you come do a workshop on X?
Yeah.
And my answer to that question for the last 7 or 8 years is no, because it won't be a good use of your money. So I can show you better uses of your money. But it's and then one of the things that's going to be different this coming year is because the book will be out next year, so that'll change the game for all of this. But we're going to create a more of a project-based program in which the cohort next year and graduates will be able to intermingle. So you'll be able to come alongside graduates who are already doing projects and kind of learning from them, observing them. They're going to learn from your fresh eyes and your perspectives. And we're going to ask people to continue to find even the smallest of projects, like how to think about your parenting of your son differently, or how to interact with a board you sit on differently as a way to practice. But yeah, so it's mostly, it's the freedom to work this way without having to work within this frame of coaching. And so you could use this to reframe. We had 3 people in our initial cohort. They had not known each other beforehand, but we connected them together. They all were involved one way or another in serving homeless youth. And they were really frustrated with their communities and sort of nonprofits response. And I felt like it wasn't making any difference. So they used ID to begin to hold different conversations with the stakeholders in their respective communities across the US, and then sharing ideas with each other about what they learned and what worked and what didn't, and help their communities think about homelessness differently and respond to the kids differently. Yeah.
Wow.
Really? Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, for me, it's like narrative coaching without a net. Yeah.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, it is.
Hold on a sec. We had a net? Did I miss that?
I didn't know we had a net.
That's the narrative coaching bling you'll get in the mail with graduation.
Oh,
Where's my net?
Right.
Well, it has a net only in the sense of it's called coaching. So people, now, of course, when we take a different view of coaching, but it's a word and a frame that people understand. Whereas ID doesn't have that as much yet. It will once the book comes out, that'll help a lot. But yeah. For me, it's anyways. I'll stop there. But
Okay. Thank you.
thanks,
Thank you. Yeah. And a plug for the Ovida AI stuff. That's good.
Okay.
So if anyone else is
And Laura's in that as well.
okay, good.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've been lots of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you in, Laura?
Tom and I, among others, I was going to say volunteered, but there was
Oh, you're the guinea pigs, right? That's what I meant. I meant
So
testers.
now I'm a guinea pig and I had no net. I'm learning a lot.
I forgot about that program. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Guinea pig with a net.
You're daring pioneers, Laura.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Pioneers don't need nets, right? They just got go.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
I
see?
like pioneered. Oh, that's a
Yeah.
good word.
Yeah. David, I had a question.
Yes,
You
please.
said there'd be a lot less, like very little teaching. So this is a very experiential type of
Yes.
program.
Mhm.
But, one thing that I'm very interested in learning and development, and also changing the way organizations learn and develop. And I read something just recently, and it may even been something you wrote about how children learn. Yeah, I think it was. And that they learn by they do something and then they, so rather than be taught something and then try it, they try it and then learn about it, kind of thing.
Yes.
Is that the idea around ID? Is it? I'm
In
trying to
a way,
pigeonhole it somewhere, but yeah, I'm just trying to understand what the experience would be like.
Yeah, so we, again, we provide some lenses through which to look at traditional activities, college teaching, training, consulting, change management, any of those things. And we just provide some lenses through that to really help us be honest about what's actually happening here and what are the assumptions and expectations we have. So a huge expectation of training is that information changes people, which it does not, for the most part. Otherwise, nobody would smoke, right? Because like the information is obvious. For me, it was a bit of a surprise in a way, but I'd say a good third or more of the core sources for ID are from progressive child psychologists and child educators. And one of my propositions is that the distinction between how adults would naturally learn and how children learn is not nearly as great as we think. And so really this simple practical example would be you're hired to do, say, a workshop for 30 managers on giving feedback. Well, there's probably hundreds of workshops these people as a collective have been to on feedback in the past. They probably are no better than they were after the first, second, or fifth one. You're going to have 30 different learning agendas because they're going to be different stages of readiness, competency, willingness to change. So there is no curriculum on the planet that would be suitable for all of them. And our intent is that we're going to pour all this content into their head and have them practice a couple of times, and magically they're going to get better at this. They're not. They will not. And some will, but they would have anyways, because they're the industrious students. They're the ones who all their life have been on the leading edge of learning, and they're actually ready and willing to do something. And so what one of the key observations I made years ago when I started working this way was that really the only variable I'm interested in for, like, say, in a workshop is a person's readiness for change. The rest is irrelevant, because I want to gear what I know and what I want to invite them into based on what they're actually ready for and what they're really actually willing to do with what they're ready for. And so for me, we spend, and there's some research we said in the program about there's actually an inverse relationship between what organizations spend money on for development and what actually makes a difference. They spend the most money on the programs, which has by far the least impact, and almost no money on follow-up and coaching, on systems change, all the things that actually shape behavior. And so for me, I just got, my last big project before I left Australia was with one of the big banks. And I created 2 modules of a 7-module leadership program for that bank through the business school there. And I worked my butt off for like 4 months, endless haggling with the HR department, with the university to build these programs. And I thought they were good programs. And then you get after the first few, I got the quintessential response. So I got a few good tips, right? And I said, you could have bought me a beer, and in 30 minutes, I could have told you those tips, and we'd all could have gone home. And then I was asked by the CFO of the bank to do a version of my sort of communication skills for leaders program for his the leaders in his team. There's about 30 of them across the globe, the bank. And I said, yes, but I said, I'm only going to do this if I get to do this my way. I'm not going to do it the old university way anymore. And he said, great. I really appreciate that. I don't want that either. I have a problem to solve and I want that problem to be fixed. I said, great, then we're not going to do a program. And then it took me probably 4 to 6 weeks to convince the global HR director and the head of the executive education department at the university to let me just do it my way. I said, well, I'm either going to do it my way or I'm not going to do this, because this guy's never going to put up with this sort of fancy program. So we identified what his issue was, and we, for half the budget and a third less time, we got him exactly what he wanted, and it was profound. And all we did was we said to people, you have to, what they sucked at was giving presentations, because these are all finance guys. So they're just all numbers geeks, and they were just wrapped on and on and on and have these 50 slides for a 20-minute presentation, and it was ridiculous. So I said, great. So you have to bring a presentation you're about to give to the workshop. And if you don't, you can't come.
Mhm.
We had a few try, and I gave him the CFO's phone number. I said, give him a call. I'm sure he'd like to know this. And they all went back to the desk and they got a presentation, and they came to the room, and I spent another 2 weeks getting the faculty converted into coaches. And I said to them, I provided them with a 4-slide framework. You'd recognize it from narrative coaching. It works really great as a design tool for presentations. And I said, when you're done, I don't care how many slides you brought, you're leaving with 4 slides. Panic, just total panic. Well, I have to, but then we start peeling away all their assumptions about what they thought they had to have in the presentation and why. And then we had no idea what they knew or didn't know, or we just know that their presentations were horrible. And so as they would have these learning moments of like, oh, I'm putting half these slides in to manage my anxiety that I might be caught on my back foot and not know. I said, well, that's great that you want to, be proud of that you want to be prepared, but it doesn't have to be in the slide to support you. It can be in your back pocket. It can be on the table. It can be in a hyperlink that you give them at the end of the talk. And so we would just slowly peel away all their assumptions about all this stuff they thought they had to be in there. And one of my favorite success stories was a woman in the group who just happened to be going to the foundation board for their bank that night to make a presentation on fiscal literacy for children in schools. And she went to that meeting, and she emailed me we had 2 sessions with them, and said, we got one of the largest grants in the history of the foundation. She said, if I had gone in with my old presentation, they would have given us some kind of token, $20,000, and told us to go away. I think she got 1.5 million or something. It was ridiculous. And she said it was because of the presentation. They were blown away by my presentation, which I created in the workshop myself. And so for me, it's taking all the design principles of narrative coaching, but it's putting it in the hands of people so they can learn themselves what they most need to learn. And then what you discover is that there's people in the room that are really good at what some people are horrible at. So we get them to teach each other. And with my bold clients, we don't even have a curriculum. We have some objectives. We have some resources. We have coaches in the room. We have some frames to engage them. And then we work with them on something that they're ready for and is meaningful to them. And then for me, this is the no net part, because we don't have a curriculum. That now we're going to turn to page 4, and that we haven't progressed past school, and school doesn't work either. And so we want to, for me, the mission really is to liberate people's potential to learn, because most people have forgotten how to learn. They've learned how to play school.
Yeah. How to study for the test.
Yeah, when my daughter was in high school, she's like me. She was a bit restless, but really smart, and she was confused by high school, and it was really kind of a jumble. And it was actually a pretty good high school, but I just told her when she was trying to navigate her freshman year, I said, Hannah, just never forget, school is a game.
Yeah.
Play the game well. You have more options in life, right? So if you need help playing the game, I'll do, I'll help you in any way I can, but never forget it's going to a game. They said if you're lucky, you'll have one amazing teacher a semester or a year.
Yeah.
Give them everything you have, because you're going to learn more from them than all the rest put together. And then find ways to get good enough grades in the classes that you need to get through. But don't take it personally. It's just a game. And it may or may not have anything to do with learning, depending on who's teaching your class. And for me, it just saved her enormous amounts of angst, judging herself as a failure as a student. I said, it's not your problem that most of the teachers are burnt out. They don't, the whole system doesn't really work very well for them anymore either. And why a lot of them went into education isn't as compelling as it once was for them. And so it served her well. And so she's now studying in Europe because she just really appreciates their approach to education.
Mm.
Yeah. It's probably a way longer answer than you wanted, Laura, but
David, you mentioned readiness to change, and I think this, of all topics, this is probably the one that fascinates me the most, because I work with so many companies and people that say, you're here because we want to change.
Yeah.
But then I've gone down the same trap of putting workshops together, and I'm jumping up and down and being enthusiastic, and people say that was an amazing workshop, just love it, thank you so much. But real change doesn't happen. The roots don't grow. And it's usually 2 or 3 people that do their best to kind of make it happen, and they run out of energy in a period of time because they can't support the rest of the organization. So can you say more about, I think it's the ID Way program that would kind of go into this?
So the analogy that we use a lot in the program is that a lot of providers are running around sort of promoting the uniqueness or value of their packets of seeds. No, these seeds are way better. They'll make better plans for you, blah, 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 which may be true. And because there's some programs are better than other programs, and then and then somebody goes, oh, I love that program, those seeds you have, Michael. I want some of those too. Right. So and you get all excited and you prepare and you bring your packet of seeds and so excited about your treasure. And then you go there and you're like it's like casting them onto a sidewalk. Right.
That's it.
So for me, most of ID is about how to till the soil. And what do they want to actually grow? How, it's like, when you get a pet and your kids are all, I'll take care of it. And I'll that lasts for like 3 days and they forget, right? Then you're stuck walking the dog and they'll pet it and they'll play with it, but then all the chores fall back to the parents, always. It's like, so it's
true.
So it's like that. And so we really, most of our various kinds of projects is we're helping people to learn from themselves. So I've, one of my sort of bizarre claims to fame in my business over the years was I've helped 2 global companies fix global IT problems, knowing nothing about the IT, but I know a lot about people and about projects, and helping them to talk to each other, use the narrative inquiry skills from narrative coaching to investigate what's happening. In both cases, they had spent millions on fancy change strategies with fancy consultants who had no idea how to fix what went wrong. And in the course of a day, we help each of them to solve their problem by asking them questions and stopping. And so for me, it's really just a way to help. And so in our bigger projects, we actually get people to identify in their own systems what would have to be different here for you to be more successful more often. And so we in some of the case studies we'll share in the ID program, the two I'm thinking of that really kicked this off about 15 years ago, when I was kind of playing multiple roles in the same organization. I decided to roll this into one cohesive strategy. And then I had a chance to do that from the get-go a couple of times. And we would do usually a half-day introductory session, mostly experiential, to introduce them to the mindset of working this way. And then I would say, now go out for the next 2 weeks and observe yourselves and observe each other. Like, what do you notice now that you didn't notice before about your own organization? And where do you see opportunities to integrate a coaching perspective? Well, they came back and were shocked at themselves. And I said, great, so where would you like to start? And well, it's all about readiness. What do your clients or users most care about? What are you willing to do something about? And so we would set them in motion to investigate their own organization. And so for many of these folks, they didn't go to their first training for 4 to 6 months. And the only training they created were ones they asked for. We're stuck because we've gotten this far in our project and we're realizing we're stirring up conflict and we're not very good at this. So we want to have a conversation about conflict. So I didn't come in and do a conflict workshop. I came in and I said, tell me what's going on. And we had these open discussions about scenarios that they were experiencing. And I would just be a coach for them. So what are you noticing in yourself about this? How does this feel for you? How are you showing up? How would you like to show up? And so I can use my expertise to shape some of the questions, but I didn't answer them for them. And then if there were some resources or books or articles or frames that would be helpful for a group, it was only upon their request and only in the context of a session in which they were going to actually use it right then and there to try to address what was happening for them.
I'm looking at the group, everybody's kind of smiling. So I'm wondering about what's going on because everybody's smiling. Like, this is delicious, or this is like, I don't know, but it's interesting to see all the faces. Just,
so you could just ask them.
Yeah, what are the smiles about?
Hey, is that a question, Laura? Is that a request? I just want to do everything.
Just did.
No, I resonate with what you're saying, David, because some of the work I do is very much in line with that. I do a lot of work with an organization called Corentus, working with teams, and that's a lot of our approach. And we do it live with people. We come to their live work meetings and work with them and coach them. And we give them the tool when they need it, but the rest of it is observing and coaching and doing it. It's very, very effective on people. Yeah. But I just want to do it all. I want to do the narrative release. I want to do this. I want to do the. It all connects, you know.
It does.
Yeah, and we're actually it's weird. So we're actually sort of building a sort of informal 5-year plan to help people actually master this way of working across all the programs over a period of time.
Yeah, very exciting.
Yeah.
Who else was smiling? Who wants to answer, Laura?
I was smiling because I'm so excited about the possibility of being with all of you again.
No, I have to go do a team interview. Sorry.
All right.
This is recorded, right?
It is.
Okay. Thank you all. Good to see you all.
All right. Thanks, Nelly.
David, is it possible to take the narrative release and the ID program at the same time concurrently?
It is. They're on different days, and usually we have 1 or 2 people that do that. One of the things, I mean, you wouldn't have to do that to get this benefit, but one of the things that I don't want to say it's a big surprise, but it's really interesting to observe is that people have done both of those, are now combining them in some really interesting ways in organizations. So Carolyn, who is on our faculty and teaches the narrative release with me, is her expertise is working with museums and universities. That's her background. And she's doing an extraordinary project right now that's just been astounding in what it's accomplished by bringing these two together. Because when you start to, let me back up. When I grew up, I realized a lot of what I chose earlier in my career was to compensate for what I wished for in my family and didn't have. It's not a novel experience. Many of us have been down parts of that road, but one of my observations in my family of origin, which wasn't probably that different than most other families, but I believed it was at the time, but was that my parents were, they didn't share a lot about their personal life. So like when the minister of our church died of a sudden heart attack, my father was the chair of the board at the church. We found out over dinner. My mom went to the phone, got the message, came back, we resumed dinner with like maybe 10 seconds of silence. When I did the eulogy for my father's father, but I never saw them shed a tear for the loss of their parents, talk about the death of their parents. I had no idea about what that was like for them at all. So then, of course, then I went on to become a grief counselor. I said, there's got to be a better way to do than this.
Yeah.
What NR brings to ID is that when you start doing ID and freeing people up to take more responsibility and have more capability for their own learning, you start to realize all of the unsaid things in organizations. The changes that were made that nobody wanted, the incompetent people that were kept in roles that long past their prime. And so what you discover is lots of grief, especially now in the pandemic.
Yeah.
With, return to work, with all the mental health challenges, with, polarities around vaccinations, with all these other things. And so, and I had not really planned on that when I started this 15 years ago, but I just started to realize that you're doing a lot of grief work unintentionally in the process of doing this. And so being able to have a hold space for the and for a lot of people, it's just mind-blowing because for the first time in their life, they're responsible, or not responsible, but they're in charge of their own learning in a way. I mean, the organization has its input and I have my input and whatever the team might have input, and it's a very liberating, but also very daunting challenge for a lot of people who are used to being told what to learn and what to do and how to go about things. And so there's some grief there of lost time, lost everything. And so because you're not prescribing what a person or a group is going to be talking about at any given time, you get surprised by stuff that comes up. A lot of it is using the NR skills to help hold space for the more difficult conversations.
The reason why I asked is when you talk about ID and changing the way people learn, and I'm thinking that the ID practitioner, whatever you call it, is being a different way as well. It's all about us being different, not just changing them. If they want to change, us showing up different, that idea of being and doing. So there's a lot of work, I think, that's done by us as well on ourselves in order to do this work.
Yes. Yeah, and that's why it took me 6 weeks to encourage the faculty in that one program to become coaches. They all were trained as coaches, but they actually secretly loved more of being a faculty because they got to be the expert and show their models and do their thing. And
I find teaching much more easier than coaching.
Yes. And most people do.
It's a default mode for most coaches to go to teaching, right?
Yes, and a lot of their questions are disguised teaching and advice giving. And so but I go back to kind of where you started about you know, kids do, and they learn from what they've done. So like, oh, riding my bike off the roof wasn't such a good idea because mommy was mad she had to leave work to take me to the ER. Note to self, don't go so high up next time.
Yeah, and not because I got hurt, but because I got in trouble.
That's right.
David, did you do that? Really? Did you?
No, I was a really good student early in my life. And then, yeah, it wasn't until it really, well, that's probably not true, but it was true. But I was really good at school and I loved school. And but I would go deeper into things that were most interesting to me, and I would skate through things that weren't interesting to me. And when I got to college, I took an introduction to sociology class with the department chair, and I think I had been really sick, so I missed the midterm. So I had to do the midterm and the final on the same day, and at the end of the class. And so I did that, and then the head of the faculty, who I later became good friends and running buddies with, but he said, "I know, let's just grade them now." And I'm like, "Oh God, this is like like no, please not." And so I got like 100 on a one and 98 on the other one. He goes, "Oh, no one ever does that." I said, "Oh, this must be my degree then." If I'm, you know, and so, and I gave a lot to that degree program, but what I started to realize was that I was drawn to people that were passionate about what they were teaching and helped me be on my journey for what I needed to confront or to learn. And my David, is his name, the faculty guy, said, "You know, when you cared about something, you're my best student by far. When you don't care about something, you're a pain in the ass because you ask questions and sort of sit in the back of the classroom." And then he laughed. He said, "That's not a bad thing." I said, I wish more students were like that, actually cared about something. And but he said, "You know, you may have a difficulty later in life because you're not going to be very compliant for things you don't want to do." Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So yeah. And so I built ID, but I will say, in all sort of fairness, there is a deep humility that comes from ID, because our primary response is, "I don't know," and let's figure that out. Yeah, and so there's both a bravery in this work and also a deep humility, because we don't try to blithely convince our participants, "You too could be great at this if you just follow this model, right? Or if you learn these fancy new words, or you whatever got this assessment that showed this." I mean, we don't, since we can use those resources as if it's helpful to somebody, but we don't have the fantasy that it's going to change someone. And so there's a humility of the mystery of learning, like, you know, of how adults actually learn. And so one of the starting points, though, is we start with experience, we start with doing, and create scaffolding for the doing so it's safe and learningful, and then helping them to learn from what they've just done, and then figure out what they want to take from that going forward. And I just yeah, so.
What you just said about courage and humility is what I was talking about the being part. Right?
Yeah.
It's not about showing up like an expert and selling something all the time, which is what I feel like I'm doing when I'm going into an organization or teaching and sharing ideas and stuff. I'm always selling something. And that feels kind of yucky.
Yeah. And the good news is we get to be experts. We just show up with it differently. We use it to guide our questions, to create experiences and experiments with people, to help them kind of name, where are you now? Like, what do you know now? What have you tried in the past? What other workshops have you been to that actually you remember and use? Let's build on that. So we don't say this is better than what you already have. It said, how can what I know help you where you're at?
Mm.
And just like in narrative coaching, because we use the same frame, we always start with the situate. Where are you now? What do you know about this topic?
Mm.
What have you tried? What's working? What's not working? What do you imagine might need to be different?
The best course I ever took was a CSI course on blood spatter.
Okay.
And yes. And the instructor says, an expert is someone who asks questions, not
Your audio just went out, Tom.
Huh. That's strange.
Can you put it in the chat?
There we go.
Okay, there we go.
There we go. Anyway, the instructor said, that the expert is someone who asks questions, not provides answers.
Mm-hmm.
And that has always stuck with me, and to look for not what's already there, but also to look for what's not there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would definitely concur
Yeah.
on
So
the
have you ever watched the American show Columbo? It's sort of how ID feels sometimes.
yes.
Yeah, oh, it's a great show. Yeah, it's a classic.
Yeah.
And Columbo looks like he's bumbling around, doesn't he?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
he looks like he doesn't have a clue and no real concept of direction, but he's really kind of circling around and getting to the heart of the matter.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't see it coming.
No.
And you know, even though you know that's the format, they do it so well.
Yeah.
You know,
Go
what
ahead, Mike.
Laura said something that really resonated. I have the same feeling. If I feel all of a sudden I've become a carpet salesman, that's what I feel like. Like, you know, first I'm teaching and then I'm convincing. So if I'm trying to convince somebody, oh, you can't live without this. It's like you're trying to pressure sale somebody.
Mm.
And it doesn't work. Sometimes they'll finally just agree to get me to shut up, I think. They'll say, yeah, you know, now you are making sense. Thank you for explaining that for the fourth time. But I think they're just blowing me off. It's just to,
Yeah.
you know, because they don't do anything with it.
Yeah.
So now to tie this back to coaching, I've noticed during coaching sessions, I'll have clients say, well, what would you do in this situation? Which is they're like dangling a little carrot. I think you've even got a slide with the fish
Yeah.
biting
Yeah.
a hook. Go, you know, don't bite the bait kind of a thing. And whenever I bite the bait, I go into sales mode because they'll say, well, what would you do? I'm stuck here. Can you just give me some advice just this one time? And you say, well, yeah, actually, I think you should meet with your boss and directly share your concern. They'll say, well, I don't think that's a good idea. You know, there's a lot of risk involved. And then you say, yeah, but with risk comes reward. And now you're selling. Now, you know, you're
The
kibitzing
hook's
back and
firmly
forth.
implanted in your cheek.
Yeah, and it's got one of those hooks that doesn't come out easily.
Right.
Because once you start down that path,
Yeah.
you can't, if you say, never mind, just throw that suggestion out. You don't have to do it. Now you're just adrift because you've stepped out of the coaching dynamic. And the person says, what else you got? Any other suggestions? You know, so it's just not a. So whenever I feel myself going into sales mode, I just shut up. I just try to focus on presence.
Yeah. And just to be fair though, it's not even in narrative coaching. There's times when offering something we know is prudent, is helpful for clients because it
Yeah.
just, but it's always in service of their request in a way that allows the baton to stay with them. It never comes over to us.
Well, yeah, that's a great way to say it. Yeah, I like that. The baton stays with them.
So I might
And
say, like, I might say, when I've tried what you're looking at doing, here's a couple of things I noticed later. I wish I had known at the time, and
Yeah.
just, but then you pull back and let them.
Yes, and no attachment to it. So you throw it out there.
Yeah.
And if they say, I don't think so, or, I don't want to go there, you just make space for them. Say,
Yeah.
well, how do you want to address this? What do you want to do?
We had this great moment in a session I was facilitating with kind of a leadership and management team for an L&D function in a very large company, and there was a couple of older white women that have been there for a long time and are really quite good at what they do, and they were using kind of our conversation as a springboard to begin to imagine a few new things they could be doing, and they were sort of kind of rallying the team to kind of join them in that. And this really delightful and really articulate young Black woman said, I couldn't do that. And she said, why not? I said, well, I don't have your seniority. My skin is not the same color as yours. I don't have a reputation here like you all do. They would be saying, who is this up in, and so I thought it was extraordinarily brave of her to say that to these older white women, to saying, I don't have the status in this organization as a young Black woman. I could never say that, especially to the white men that you're going to be talking to.
Mm.
And so then we had this amazing conversation, and then it helped the older white women to start to realize the privilege with which they could say these things, because they had earned that right in that organization. And that really their role was not to kind of forge the way, but actually to figure out, what do we need to do in the organization to help these younger women come up and have status and respect in the organization? So kind of turning the orientation back to their own team. But again, by putting this back on them and just helping them realize they were trying to just forge ahead with leaving half their team behind who didn't have the political capital to go do that.
Mm.
Mm.
Are there other questions you have on your mind, or things that are coming up for you?
So one question that comes up for me hearing this is are many people coming into the ID program without any prior work with narrative coaching or within the Institute?
Yeah, so in the past, we were more open about that. Now we're going to be more, I won't say it's stark, but we're going to highly encourage people to start with narrative coaching. It's the most approachable of the three, the most well-established. So, but there may be some, like I know that there's one woman in particular that I talked to who's coming, she lives in Mexico. She's never been to a program, but she's read the book and she's been to a couple of WBEX things. And so she feels like she's got a flavor for it. It'll be a big deal to kind of do it live, but I felt, and I spent half an hour with her on Zoom, and I feel confident she'll be fine. But by and large, I would imagine 95+% of the people will be coming from NC in some fashion. Yeah, and which will help you all, because then you don't have to stop and explain things, or we can just kind of move on from where you started. So, and what's on your mind, Julie?
Oh, I was just thinking about, so some of the work I do is I teach people to be coaches in a ICF certification company here in Seattle. It's very small, cohorts of 10. And I was just imagining the possibility of what ID Way overlapped with facilitating a coach training course would look like. And it just it's exciting, you know, that whole idea of you know, hanging off the walls or sitting by the lake.
Yeah.
The more we can be sitting by the lake and co-create together, the more exciting it feels about work feels. So that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Oh, Tom.
A question on how, I'm looking, a question about certification.
Yeah.
How will there be a NC certification? Does the ID program or narrative release program blend into the certification process? Have you thought that through?
Yes, we have.
Okay.
So there is not a certification for narrative release. It seems antithetical to what we're doing.
Yeah.
There may be something in the near future. So we've had some requests from people that they'd like to really focus on working at thresholds. Like we have one woman who's worked a lot with death and dying and with grieving families, and she wanted to get really good at using NR to work in that space. And so there may be like a threshold kind of worker thing that we do down the road, but for now there's no certification. It's like being certified in life, right? You know, we want you to have the richest possible experience, but there's no way we're going to measure. I'm sorry, you don't qualify. Yeah. So, and then
You're not good enough.
yeah. I'm sorry. You have to go back to remedial life school or something. So for starting next year, we're going to offer the program in NC separately. What we're finding, for a number of reasons, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out this year, but for last year, only about half of our participants wanted certification.
Okay.
Many of them have plenty of them. They don't need any more. They were more interested in just the experience, and we're very grateful for the experience. But and so we've changed some of that for this year, but then next year we're going to have it. You can just go through the complete program and be done. And then if you need certification or want certification for your job, for ICF, or for whatever, that'll be a separate process. It'll be much more directed at practice and gauging your level of practice. So it's going to be a much more robust certification than it's been in the past. But that's for people for whom that's really important. And then, and the same will be true for ID, that you'll next year, you'll be able to go through the whole program without a certification. And then if you want certification, that will follow the following year. We haven't worked out what that one's going to look like, because it'll be a bit different than the narrative coaching one, since it's not quite as cut and dry. But the good news is that, and part of why we can do this is that when we open up the lab in full in January, there will be a graduate track. So for narrative coaches, there'll be an Oviedo-based supervision program. There'll be sort of a graduate sort of process. I'm working with Anne and Vicky and Alice in our faculty right now to build all that for next year. It'll probably launch in the spring, our spring. So that even if you don't get certified because the certification's not important to you, you'll have robust chances to continue your practice and your growth as a narrative coach. And I think we're just, I think it's one of the downsides of coaching is that certifications mean something and nothing at the same time.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of MCCs you couldn't pay me to be coached by. Lovely people, great people. They've worked really hard. They deserve what they've gotten. And but I've been around ICF for 25 years, so I know where this all began. I know how it got started, and they're getting better. Joel's their research director is really helping them enormously. I continue to do support them through speaking and stuff, but my next paper is basically sort of showing a path beyond competencies. So competencies is like the lowest possible level of measurement, and it's the least useful by far.
Yeah.
So for me, I want to create a certification that's meaningful. But in general, we're finding that people are less interested. They're going to be their own measure of success. They're going to be they've come to the program for other reasons. And for those for whom it's important, because there's some that it helps for their CV, it helps for their resume, it helps certain clients they have really respect that, and it gives them a sense of confidence that's important to them. So it's great. But we don't want that to be a barrier for somebody, or what we found is when we have people that really want it and people that don't really want it in the same program, that kind of waters down the value of the certification. And the people that want it don't feel like it's robust enough, and the people that don't want it think it's too much.
Right.
So we're just going to make them two distinct choices.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah, I'm looking for certification for the people that might be looking for
Yeah, great.
like I feel confident without the little letters or numbers behind my name, but they may be looking for that.
Well, and I think, Tom, it's probably a pretty, I would imagine it's a prudent step, because because you're changing careers. So
Yeah.
to create a really solid footing for yourself and to show that to others, I think would be really advantageous.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in my case, the visibility is something that would be helpful. It isn't totally necessary to my functioning in this arena, but it can be a visibility factor.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to do all of this. Right now, I'm in a place where I've been burning the candle at both ends for so long that I desperately need some time out to a degree. I don't have to unplug altogether, but and I love everything that is here. And I've been blessed to work in groups, and I really enjoy that dynamic. There's a chemistry that happens when you have groups of people, but I also love the one-on-one. It all appeals to me. I could just soak in this stuff.
But it'll be here whenever you're ready for it. Yeah.
That's good.
David, I signed up for Thursday thinking that would be more narrative release focused. Is that the case?
Yeah. So we
Okay.
so we did a few that were sort of open to people curious about any of the programs, and they worked fine. But then we thought, people kept trying to decide, what we know about human psychology is that if you're faced with too many choices, you tend not to buy anything.
A confused prospect never buys. It's an
Correct.
old sales adage. Yeah.
Yep. And so we were getting a lot of very excited but confused prospects, and they were so enthused they were doing nothing, which isn't good for our business or good for them. And so we decided to have these single focus immersion sessions so people could just really zero in on the program or programs they were most interested in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're doing two today for ID, one for narrative coaching tomorrow, and then I think it's tomorrow, and then two on narrative release.
Yeah, Thursday. Yeah.
Yeah, I will be there in the afternoon. My husband's traveling, and I'll have kids at school in the morning. So
Okay.
Yeah. I guess complementary to the programs is the lab, David. And
Yes.
Can you speak more about, you mentioned, the intersection with graduates in the ID program, and just how there'll be more opportunity for people to just kind of learn collectively. You are including the lab as part of the ID way and narrative coaching,
Correct.
I understand, but not for the narrative release.
Well, no, because a lot of what we would do in the lab, they're already doing in their own program, and and we did a pilot of the NR last year. We didn't do it this year in part because one of our 2 core faculty had 2 major deaths in her family and needed to take the year off to kind of manage all that. And so but now we rebuilt the program from the ground up based on what we learned. And so it didn't feel like it really needed a lab space at this point. It's its own lab in a way. That will change in time, but we just want to keep it simpler. Yeah, and so we're including that because we want people to get a sense for the programs are never the point. The programs are the beginning of a journey, not the end. And a lot of it, like we're saying with ID, in real life, if you have like a hobby, cooking, bicycling, whatever it is, you wouldn't say, oh, I went for my first bike ride. Now I'm an expert on biking, right? No, it's like, I didn't crash, but so we want to get away from just like a single exposure, like take the program, now you have it. We want to give support for people to work on projects together, continue to get skill practice, to get feedback, to learn from each other, to be, in time to be able to offer little sessions for others based on maybe your expertise, say in one aspect of narrative coaching. But it's just realizing that, for me, going back to, I think, something you asked, Laura, in the very beginning, this is really, in many ways, a state of being in the work. And, I've been at this for, well, depending how you count, 40 years. And I think I'm now finally getting good at this. And each of you is going to have been on your own journey, and you're bringing your own histories and your own biographies and your own expertises to this. And there's sort of, I think at this stage in our lives, but also in this stage of the world, there's sort of a marination that's happening in kind of, rather than chasing after more new things, it's like, how can I just stand still and deepen what I already have and really distill it into what's most essential for me and most important to me in my work, for each of you, and then saying, well, how might that manifest itself differently in the world? And so for me, the lab is really that place of marination, incubation, connection with other people, sort of coming to terms with what this is meant for you, what you have now, and maybe get some inspiration from others and support from others to go do something about it in the world. Yeah, so like, for example, Tom, I'm thinking these 3 women that worked with the homeless youth. I know the program that you and your wife have in the city, a different population, but I could have to imagine some of the same issues, right? It might be interesting to go to talk to them and meet them and see what they're doing now and what they're learning in their work that might help you and what you and your wife are working on with the group of those kids. And I feel like the world doesn't really, in many ways, need more programs. It needs people doing new things. And so for me, ID is equipping people to go do new things in whatever way, in whatever context is important to you.
David, there's so many things popping up right now. Case studies. One thing that I was thinking was bringing case studies to do more experiential work. So this is what's going on for me and with peers and groups and so on. I love that idea. When I started coaching, one of the things I always said was, I don't want to do this journey alone. Like this is not a solitary thing.
Yeah.
I've done that, been there, done that, like had to do my own thing and be individually successful for whatever reason, but I don't want to do that anymore. So the idea of co-creating and working with peers, in labs or whatever it looks like, or even approaching work together, I love the idea of bringing that in. And then I thought, we're each individuals as a case study.
Yes.
Having our own experiences. I'm thinking of an example. When I was in grade 9, our history teacher was teaching us about politics, and he had us set up a cabinet, a caucus. So But we had in Canada, we have a prime minister and all of that stuff. So I was the prime minister of this caucus. And this is grade 9, right? And the reason I bring it up is because I remember that most of all through my entire high school journey, that was in the first semester of grade 9. So there's where I go about doing stuff versus being taught stuff. And that experience, I mean, it enabled us to learn about politics, but learn about ourselves at the same time.
Yeah, sure.
So that's kind of where I'm going with this, is that it's learning about things, but learning about ourselves simultaneously and shifting those. Like the other thing I wrote down here is all these lenses that we have, all these filters that we have. And sometimes it's just polishing the lens, but sometimes maybe it's changing the lens altogether.
Well, and one of the things we're doing next year that's I think even better about that is that we're going to create opportunities in each module for you to interact with graduates who are also in the lab, because then you'll be coming alongside their fledgling projects, their first goes at some of this, and you'll learn. So the the limitation of all the case studies I bring is I've been doing this for a long time, and doesn't mean I'm perfect at it, but I've done this for a long time. And I'm excited to bring even a couple of my failures or things that weren't as successful, just to show what can go wrong if you're not careful. But that's a bit daunting for someone who's brand new to all this. But if you're coming alongside of somebody who's just been at this for 9 months or a year, they're fresher, they're kind of a bit rawer and kind of thinking. So you can kind of get inside the mechanics of how they're approaching this and how they're thinking and how they're putting this together. And you can kind of workshop it with each other, and like in your school project, and actually see it in action, not just in talking or in reading, but actually in action. So I mean, I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. And then we've had a number of students who have partnered to do joint workshops, joint interventions. And so we'll get a couple of them to come and do little case presentations of how they used ID.
Great.
Is there anything else I can offer you today?
I'm looking forward to the conversation Thursday to go more into the narrative. But this is really helpful to get a picture of integrative development and how you're seeing that growing out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're most welcome. I think that's my wish for you is just to notice where your energy is right now and where you want to focus your attention in the coming year. That may help a lot in deciding which one is next for you. If you have any more questions, just reach out. We'll be happy to help, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, David.
For your time, David.
You're most welcome.
Thank you.
All right.
Great to
Goodbye.
see
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Yeah. Nice to see everyone.